Welcome to Creative Mornings, Oakland. How are you guys doing this morning? To represent Oakland today, we have Indi Young. Indi is a research consultant and an empathy coach. She was the founder of Adaptive Path, a really famous design and user experience agency in the city. She's written 2 books. One, Mental Models in 2008, and the second one, Practical Empathy, that was published earlier this year. She drove all the way from Marin, and I really want to thank her. She came here really early this morning. Please welcome up on stage, Indi Young.
Okay, so how many people have had the chance to actually use empathy in their work? Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hand up if that chance to use it was spontaneous. Pretty spontaneous. Okay. All right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So there is a hell of a lot to talk about in terms of empathy, and I tried to get it down to 30 minutes. So I'm going to go over this 20-minute limit. In fact, when I started writing the book, I thought I was going to get it done in like 3 months. And then I took a look at what everybody's talking about in terms of empathy, and I realized, oh my God, it's this big messy pile of stuff. And how in the world are you going to use it in your work when a lot of people are talking about it differently? I have to narrow it down. I have to make it usable for what we do. And everybody in this room does a lot of different things. So I needed to make it usable for a lot of different situations as well. So I want to talk about 2 things today. One, the first 2 are actually things that people I see face in their work that I want to solve with empathy. And then I want to give you kind of this core bit about empathy that you can take and use yourselves and make your empathy in your work a little bit less spontaneous, a little bit more certain, okay? So the first thing that I run into a lot that people face are assumptions. So assumptions are, by definition, those things that you don't think about, that you don't realize that you have, right? And therefore they are pernicious because they end up making a mess of some of the things that you do. Think back to like some decision you may have had or something that your organization did as a whole, and it just like came back at you all wrong. It was probably because of an assumption. So let me give you some examples. This is an example from an airline I was working with once, where they were taking a look at all the passengers that either check bags or don't check bags. And this happens to be the average passengers for the day, and the number of bags that got checked, out of the bags that did get checked for the day, 66%, about 2/3 were female, 1/3 were male. And of course, everybody's walking around the office going, oh yeah, you know, it's because women have more stuff they have to take with them, you know, all that makeup and all those shoes, right? Buy more shoes at Soul Shoes, right? Okay, anyway. And I'm sitting there going, now wait a minute, why did you break it up by gender? Why didn't you break it up by age? Or why didn't you break it up by the type of trip, a business trip or a vacation? Or why didn't you break it up by the length of the trip, or whether the trip was international or something? I mean, why gender? That's an assumption, right? Another example, this is a little closer to home, a researcher in our very own Berkeley. This was a little bit right after the 99% things, and he had this hypothesis that when you're wealthy, you care less about the people around you, and he wanted to prove it through a bunch of different experiments. One of the experiments that he did, and remember we're talking about assumptions here, was he put some people at a crosswalk wanting to cross, and then took notes about which makes and models of cars actually stopped for that pedestrian, and which makes and models just went right past them. And on average, the ones that went right past tended to be the more expensive cars. And so he said, oh, those rich people, they don't care about pedestrians. And this is an assumption because, if you end up getting a chance to drive your friend's fancy car, are you all of a sudden going to stopping for pedestrians? There's stopping, right? That's hard. Anyway, the idea is this one phrase that you all learned in university: correlation is not causation. Just because there has a tendency to have expensive cars not stop doesn't mean that driving an expensive car is going to cause you to stop stopping for pedestrians, right? Correlation is not causation. You really can't find out what is going on until you ask why. So if those cars that didn't stop, he had chased down and gotten the driver to roll down the window and taken a little time to talk to them, he could find out. He can't do it by telepathy. The telepathy servers are not working right now. Right? This is a quantum computer. This is our best hope for a telepathy service, but I don't think it's actually even going to work for that. So if you had actually stopped these drivers, you might have gotten a lot of answers back. And I'll read these things for you. Over on the left, you've got the more positive things. It's like, oh my God, I should have stopped. You're right, I should have stopped. But I was too distracted looking for directions or looking for that address or by that commotion over there or that bright thing over there. I didn't even see the ped, my God, the car was showing, in the way or something, oh my God. On the right, though, are the more negative. They're like, oh yeah, I saw the ped, but, it's just faster if I go through the intersection first and not wait for them. And then, everybody's time will be fast. Or all the cars behind me, I didn't want to slow them down. Everybody's in a hurry, time is of the essence. Or those very few people who actually don't know that it's the law. Oh. So, if you had done this, then you could take a look at this set and then maybe start drawing some conclusions about wealth. But you really need to start talking to those people more about what is wealth. And I'm going to guarantee that not everybody in that is driving a fancy car or considers themselves wealthy. I personally happen to be allergic to demographics. People talk about demographics, I'm like, So this is all about assumptions or pernicious. Let me get back to that bag checking thing. We actually did do the research at that airline. And we came up with all sorts of different reasons that had nothing to do with gender, didn't have anything to do with age either. Had to do with oh God, something awful happened to my bag the last time I checked it, or the last 3 times. This guy had powder on his bag, white powder. He's all like, anthrax? I'm not checking my bag anymore. So, or maybe it's something precious, like your guitar, or it was a laser medical device this guy was taking to donate in Nepal. It's like, I'm not checking that in. God knows what they'll do with it, right? On the opposite end of the scale, it's like, oh, I've got something, I'm giving this poster at this conference and I can't fit it into the bin, so I'm gonna check it in. Or scuba gear, or this gal who was visiting Belgium and wanted to bring all this beer back. There's no way you're getting all that beer through security. You have to check it in. So there, and maybe the people who don't want to drag their bags with them through the connecting airport or keep track of it or something. It's only going to take me 5 minutes to get it off of the baggage carousel. Okay, I can deal with that. So there's reasons, and these reasons have nothing to do with what they assumed was important. Gender. Okay, so assumptions are pernicious. This is one of the things that I see people face. And asking is the way that you can get past your assumptions. First, you have to recognize you have them, though, which is a little bit of a problem. And asking is also a way to find differences. Those differences, they all showed up in parties of 4, right? But there's all sorts of different ways that people have of thinking, and you can see these patterns when you ask enough people. So another thing that I see people get, kind of fighting with at work is getting stuck in a creativity loop. And this is a little bit like being in a mirrored room, and you and your team are in there, and you're designing for each other in a way, right? It's all about trying to improve what you've got and not looking outside of that room. So let me give you a little example. The ideas, we all know about the creative brain. There's been all those research articles written about creativity and the times that you're creative and how creative ideas pop up when you're relaxed and you're not like really trying to focus on that problem. But all those ideas that come out are bounded by the problem that you're trying to solve. One way around this is to put other people's way of thinking into your brain as well. The problem with the mirror room is that you're trying to solve the problem that you've been looking at. So this is something at Twitter. I have a friend who signed up for a Twitter account. She does all her social networking on Facebook, and she's in tech. Well, a year goes by since her last tweet, and Twitter sends her this email. It's like, oh, do you know how to tweet? It's like, really? Yes, I know how to tweet. It's not that hard. I think my 5-year-old daughter knows how to tweet. So it's thinking of that person when they were writing that email as a person who didn't understand social media. Another example Facebook did was this whole year later, here's a photo that got a lot of likes, but they're thinking about people who post a lot of photos. And the photo with the most likes, they're gonna then throw in front of them and say, hey, do you wanna repost this? Like, oh, that awesome vacation that you went on. Let's repost it and show everybody again. Well, they showed me I think I posted 3 photos last year. They showed me my picture of tomatoes and they're all like, oh, repost it. I'm like, well, no, that's kind of banal. That's not, who cares? And besides, my tomatoes this year are all kind of dead because drought. Anyway, so that didn't work, but this can be much, much more serious. The year in review thing you may have heard that happened to Eric Meyer happened the year that his daughter died of cancer, the day before her 6th birthday. That's pretty tragic. And Facebook doesn't have a way of saying, I support you. Instead, they just have the like button, and so it got a lot of likes. Right? Because we're all there for him. What a horrible thing to happen. And he needs his community. Now, he is a techie, and he took a look at this, and he's like, I don't want to revisit this. But he doesn't get mad at Facebook. Instead, he starts writing some posts and starts doing some talks about how the algorithms are still in beta, really. They took their original idea with the original audience they had in mind, they stuck it out there, made it work, and then they spent the next 10 years tweaking it, instead of reaching out to broader audiences, reaching out to other kinds of experiences. And he says, I forgive you. This is not your problem, Facebook. This is everyone's problem. Software, anything that you use today is basically still in beta. I mean, it's only been out there for 10 years. We're maybe a little bit longer, but we're not doing great. It's the next generation that's going to start reaching out. It's us helping people look at the other avenues that we can look at and try to figure out other types of support that we have to put out there yet. Okay. In fact, Christina Engelbart, daughter of the famous man who invented the mouse, she's talking about the same thing. Why are we simplifying our algorithms? Why is it important to make things simpler? Why aren't we making them broader, more complex, more like an ecosystem with lots of different components that interact? The only way you can do that is to take other people's ideas into your brain at the same time when you're trying to solve problems. And when you do that, this is when broader ideas are going to come out. And I'm not saying that these broader set of ideas is better. It's just broader. You have more to work with. You have more to consider. You have different ways you can change your focus and different directions that you can branch off into in your work and what you do. It's a lot of opportunity out there. So, keep stuffing your brain. I was just talking to some people earlier, and the idea is not to just make this like one big effort. And I'm going to go understand how people are working and thinking and then take it back into my office and figure this out. This is something you do constantly for the rest of your lives. Do it in little tiny bits, because there's no way to do it full on all the time. Little tiny bits at whatever rate you want. So empathy is the thing that's going to help us counter the consequences of designing for everyone, or designing for a very narrow set of people that we started out with in our minds when we first came up with that thing. Okay? Empathy is what's going to happen, but what is empathy? So think about it right now. When I say the word empathy, what comes to mind? Does anybody want to shout out? Listening?
Kindness.
What's that?
Kindness.
Kindness. Consideration for others. Understanding.
Putting yourself in the other's shoes.
Putting yourself in the other's shoes. Yes. These are all valid definitions. I hear this a lot. And walking in someone's shoes is actually, I think, one of the most prevalent, stickiest understandings of empathy. And yet, we get these business articles where they go the other direction. Somebody laughs. It's the Harvard Business Review talking about empathy in terms of being responsive. Then we've got something in Forbes that talks about empathy as connecting to or relating to something. And then a recent article which made me kind of not happy because they're all like, oh, we've got to, measure empathy. And empathy to them is having good intentions and better selves. Okay, nobody even talks about walking in somebody's shoes, which surprises me. So let me talk about the idea that these articles kind of bring up, which is be more sensitive. And that just seems to be a better self sort of a thing. How do you make sensitivity a part of your work? Well, luckily, sensitivity is just one of the different kinds of empathy. There were like 8 different kinds of empathy in this one article that I was reading in psychology literature. I'm going to tell you about 2 of them today because we've got limited time. The first of which has to do with sensitivity. It's called affective empathy. Affective means emotional, so we can just call it emotional empathy, and that is a little easier to wrap our heads around since we're not psych majors. And emotional empathy is being able to understand what somebody else's emotion is and dwell in it with them. Okay? How many people saw Inside Out, the movie that Pixar did? Okay, they have a really great example in there. It's a movie about the emotions inside of a little girl as she grows a little bit older. They show different emotions as characters, and one of the emotions was called joy and the other was called sadness. And one of the things that this girl was leaving behind from her childhood was an imaginary friend called Bing Bong, kind of like a pink elephant. And Bing Bong sees his favorite rocket get destroyed. And he's sad. Unfortunately, they're on a quest. They have to go and do something right now, time's a ticking. And so Joy's all like, come on, tickle, 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 let's get you going, come on. We've got to go, Bing Bong. She's trying to cheer him up so that they can go. Instead, what sadness does, it's a great example, sits down next to him and says, oh my God, that rocket ship meant so much to you. There were so many memories, so many things it represents to you. You must be so sad. And Bing Bong starts crying. And he said, yes, it was. And he tells a story about some of his memories. And then he gets up and he says, okay, I'm ready. Let's finish this quest. And the emotion joy is all like, sadness, how did you do that? And sadness is all like, I just had to listen, right? Be there with that person, dwell in that emotion with that person. So we, unfortunately, don't do a very good job teaching our kids empathy. You see a kid in a mood or with an emotion that isn't appropriate for the time, and you say, don't be so sad. I saw a toddler and his mom at the playground, and they had to leave to go catch the bus. And the toddler is all like, no, and the mom's all like, don't be angry. It's like, you're telling him not to have an emotion? So we're learning as we grow up that, there are certain emotions we're not supposed to have. If she'd just spend a second, yeah, I'd be angry too. You know, we have to leave the playground. But there's this other thing we get to go do if we get on the bus on time, right? But just spend a little time dwelling in that space, that emotional space. There are a couple other things about emotional empathy. I talk a lot about it. Oh, I have a couple of copies of my book too, which I'll give away at the end of this. But I'll go into more detail in the book. Can't do it today. But one of them is that it tends to strike like lightning. And like lightning, it's spontaneous, it's powerful, it's really illuminating, as the people who raised their hands at the beginning have the experience of.
But it's not necessarily something you can make happen if you want it to, right? So, in your work, emotional empathy is the process of supporting another person through their emotional process. In your work, that's what it is. Emotional empathy is supporting someone else through their emotional process. Now, cognitive empathy is the second kind of empathy I want to introduce. And cognitive empathy is about understanding what went through somebody's mind and heart as they were trying to accomplish a certain intent or purpose. Okay? It's as if you are listening to their little inner voice. You know, you've got that inner voice where you're like, oh, do I really want to get up early and come to this thing this morning? And last time I came, it was kind of hard to find parking, and I'm so worn down, my inbox is like so full. You know, it's that little inner voice that's helping you make a decision. But, you know, I really want to come. Okay. So maybe I really want to come because this word empathy means something to you and you have a specific reason or connection or history with it. And that's how you decide. Or maybe you want to come for another reason. I don't know, because I didn't ask all of you, I asked a few of you. Anyway, it's that inner voice. But I want to focus a little bit on intent or purpose. Intent and purpose is not, you know, booking a ticket to go see the client. Your purpose is to make that client feel more supported because they're feeling a little bit iffy about the way the project is going. And you want to go do that in person. So that's what a purpose is. A purpose is something much more human, much broader, something you could ask your great-grandmother. It's something that we have all done for eons. I want to go support that person so this project goes better. I'm going to go see that person in person. Okay? So in your work, cognitive empathy is supporting another person in achieving their intent or purpose. And you do this, at least for what we're interested in your work, is through your collaboration with other people and through the things that you're creating. So being able to support another person in achieving their intent or purpose. So think about, you know, that guy you've been fighting with at work. What is his purpose? Or the, you know, that project that they're trying to push on you and you don't think it makes sense. What is their purpose? Okay? So let's talk a little bit real quick about making empathy happen. So walking in shoes. This, like I said, is the stickiest definition of empathy. And it's all about sort of being in that person's world, you know, trying to think the way that person would think. Try to, you know, work your way through a scenario the way you think that person would think. It's all about applying empathy. And when I go work with clients and talk with them about this, it's all done by imagination. People are making up what they think other people are thinking. Or they're saying, oh yeah, you know, I heard one person say this, and so I'm going to go with that. Or they're using their own team as an understanding of what goes through people's heads. And this is how we get into that mirror room. We aren't, as you can tell, there's a big space on my slide, empty, because it's going to be filled. We aren't doing the development of empathy. We're not taking the time to actually understand what's going through other people's heads. And we live in a world, especially here in the Bay Area, but lots of other places, where we're going at a breakneck pace. And it's really important to do things fast. Why? Well, that could be a whole nother lecture, right? But why are we going so fast? I don't know, but we do definitely need to take time. We need to have little tidbits of time where we can grab them and ask and spend time listening with other people so that we get those broader set of ideas popping out of our heads. This is not going to happen based on imagination. So listening is something that a lot of people are talking about. This happens to be Julian Treasure. He has a couple of good TED lectures. And in one of them, he was talking about how we teach our kids reading and writing, communicating by the written word, but not speaking or listening, communicating by the spoken word. That's all just learned by social exposure. And we need to do a better job of that. So anyway, more stuff to go look at. The other thing that I see companies push back at is that in your work, oh my gosh, if you go and listen to somebody and you hear their story, the way I understand it is going to be different than the way you understand it. Words are open to interpretation. They're qualitative. How do we get anything out of there that's reliable? It's like monsters, right? And I agree that they're open to interpretation at the surface. But once you get down into the way people are thinking, there is amazing clarity, there's an amazing amount of pattern that you can see as evidenced by those results from the airline study about checking bags. There's a lot of patterns. And it's totally worth it. So let me give you a little definition of what I mean by surface and what I mean by depth. Surface is what we're talking about when we talk with each other every day. It's our opinions, it's our preferences, it's our statements of fact. You get home in the afternoon or the evening and you say, oh, how did your day go to somebody else in your house? And they're all like, oh, it was fine, Ricky didn't turn in his report on time. These are statements of fact. Explanations. We're staying at this level. It's so rare, even with our loved ones, to go down a little deeper into, well, what went through your mind? What were you thinking? How did you make that decision? What was the reason for that opinion? You watched those debates the other day and you're like, Trump. So why that opinion? Where does that come from? How did that get formed? It's really interesting to get down to that depth. There are guiding principles there that you can find. And then you can look and see the patterns across people. So like I said earlier, you can't develop empathy by using telepathy because we don't have those telepathy servers. You also can't develop empathy via the traditional interview, which a lot of people try in their workspaces. Now, interviews are fine for certain things. They're a good tool to use. But you cannot use them to develop empathy. You need to use active listening. Active listening, keyword. You may find a lot of it out there. And again, that everyday level of conversation that we're having is staying at that surface level. So you have to go a little deeper. That's what active listening is about. So instead of calling them interviews when I'm using them in my work, because I want to really differentiate them from what an interview is as a tool, I'm calling them listening sessions. And a listening session, it is active listening, plain and simple. And it's all about letting the person take you where that person thinks is important, what goes through their head, in the direction and the path that is important to them. It's just like going on a tour in a foreign city. How many people have gone on a tour with a little guide, right? Walk around, the guide tells you some stuff about this place and the history of the people there, and you walk around to the next place and they do the same thing. And even though you have like this burning passion about church architecture, you don't interrupt and ask about the church that's down the street. You don't, in a listening session, interrupt the person who's guiding you through their thinking and ask about something that's burning passion to you at work. You just leave it off the table. There is also no list of questions when you walk in. And if you're doing this with a colleague, clearly you're not going to come with a list of questions. You're just going to say, hey, you're really interested in doing that project and you keep pushing at it. I need to understand more about what your thinking is and how you came to this conclusion so that I can understand it and maybe support you in those intentions. When you get into a listening session, here's the Csikszentmihalyi book that you may want to look into. You get into a sense of flow. This is when you don't realize time is passing. You're so intent on listening to that one person and where they're going. So I want to tell you a few little guidelines about a listening session. And the first one, I stick a toddler up here with the word why. And we all know this, right? Toddlers are very good at asking why. But I'm not putting her up there because of that why. I'm putting her up there because she's not embarrassed about what she doesn't know. She's not embarrassed to ask. She's not, she's fine with being naive about things. And that's how we need to be in a listening session. Fine with being naive. Fine with asking about everything. Okay? You also, during a listening session, if you're doing this with maybe a potential customer, you want to be aware of when you're making assumptions. And they can be teeny little things like this person says, oh, and then I look it up. And you're thinking, oh, okay, she Googles it on her laptop at her desk. But wait, that's an assumption. Maybe look it up means something else to her. And you need to talk to her and find out. Another thing is you don't want to play researcher. A lot of the time when people are trying to do this kind of work, they're all like, oh, wow, okay, so the other person that said that is saying something similar. There's a pattern here. You're analyzing this. If you use your cognitive space for analytics during a listening session, you're not paying attention to that person. You need every brain cell to pay attention. So you really can't think about what this is doing for your organization or what this is doing for your work or how this relates to the other people you're talking to. This is super important. This is also a time when you need to let go of your need to demonstrate your worth. Ever since we were kids in school, we were taught, hey, you have to show how good you are on the spelling test. You have to show how good you are by getting a graduate certificate. You have to show how good you are in a job interview. When you're around the table with your teammates, you have to show your contribution. Yeah, I'm here as a teammate. I'm making things better. We're all making things better together. Look at what we're doing. But when you're listening to someone, when you're in an active listening session, you set all of that aside. And it's sometimes kind of hard to do, even for people who are professors and talk about it all the time and do it all the time. It's like, yeah, this is something you're constantly teaching yourself. It's like, hey, I'm here with this person. I know nothing about the way their brain works, and I don't want to insert any of myself in there. No control. You also, along the same lines, don't ever want to correct them. If they say something, their model of the world got built up for a reason, and that's your chance to dive into it and see how they built it up. What was their thinking behind that? This is a great opportunity to just dive in, and don't even correct them afterwards. Don't offer suggestions, because just the act of doing that is establishing your expertise, and you want to set that aside. All right, along the same lines, emotional reactions, even if you don't agree, they're valid. I ran into this a lot when I was working with the folks in the airline. It's like, oh, she shouldn't be so upset, just because her flight got delayed. It's like, no, you have to embrace that. You have to accept it. It's real. Speaking of emotions, your own reactions are going to crop up when you're listening to someone. And it's good to recognize them, acknowledge them, and then also set them aside so that you can then go into curiosity. The photographer here is from Oakland and actually talked to this guy about the rats and why he carries them around, and had all these amazing stories to tell about the rats. It's another point where you've got this opportunity to dive into curiosity. So the empathetic mindset is all about stopping for a moment your need to solve problems, to make ideas, to make things better, because we all want to make things better. When you're in this little mindset, that's not what you're doing. All what you want to do is explore other people's thinking, other people's reaction, other people's intents and purposes. Just for a moment, gather that information, and then you can go back to your ideas and your solving problems. But if you do this over and over again continuously for the rest of your lives, you will fill your brain with so much more material. And as any good thing that's enjoyable to see and do, like musicians and athletes, you have to practice. And a good way to practice active listening is in your everyday life. If you're in line somewhere, this is actually the casual commuter or carpool line down near the Grand Lake Theater. Your line at the grocery store, maybe when you're in the locker room, maybe when you're out walking your dog. Anytime you're around strangers, take the chance. Say something to them like, oh, nice shirt, and see what they have to say and see if you can get into some sort of an active listening session. If you practice this, and you need to be in the right mood to practice this, if you're standing in a line and you just had the worst day of your life, probably not such a great day to practice. But if you practice this when you are in a good mood, and as many times a week as you can, then when opportunities arise, you will feel so confident in a listening session. So I want to thank you so much for your time today.